Welcome to the latest episode of the Catalyst Health and Wellness Coaching Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Bradford Cooper, and today we're going to discuss a topic that we frankly hope puts you into a deep slumber. We'll be talking sleep with Dr. Alex Agostini from South Australia. Dr. Agostini has spent years studying sleep, performance, and health, all topics of great interest to us here at Catalyst. We're going to jump right into the practical elements of sleep, why it matters, and what we can do to improve our own sleep as we progress through this episode. Thanks as always to those of you who engage with us here at Catalyst. Your emails have been wonderful, and we really appreciate those of you who have shared the podcast with friends or even taken the time to provide one of those 5-star ratings on iTunes or left a kind comment for potential future listeners to see. If you're not already a subscriber, this might be a good time to jump on board. I'm looking ahead at who's on tap for our next 12 episodes, and you're not going to want to miss these. As always, feel free to reach out to us with questions you may have about the coaching certification, integrating more meaningful coaching into your organization's wellness strategy, or anything else on your mind at results@catalystcoachinginstitute.com. And you can always find additional resources or details about the upcoming certification at catalystcoachinginstitute.com. Now, let's dig into this crazy topic of sleep with Dr. Alex Agostini on this episode of the Catalyst Health and Wellness Coaching Podcast. Dr. Agostini, it is a privilege to have you join us tonight.
Thank you very much for having me.
Absolutely. Sleep is such a popular topic, even on this podcast. The previous guests we've had, people love listening to those episodes. And what we'd really like to focus on here is the practical application of that. But first, a little history. How'd you end up making this the focus of your research? You have all kinds of options. Why this?
I have to say it was kind of an accident. I did my undergraduate degree in psychology, and as part of that, in my third year, I had to do some work experience. Mm-hmm. And I had a lot of options, but most of them were working with older people, which was something that I kind of knew I didn't really want to do. Mm-hmm. And so my only other option was working in the sleep lab at my uni. And I was put there, and that was about 7 years ago, and I've never really looked back because I had no idea that sleep was what I wanted to do. But when I got into it, I realized how interesting it is and how fascinating it is and how much you can help people when you know about sleep. So yeah, 7 years ago, and here we are still.
Fantastic. Yeah, I always make the side comment that when people come up to me just randomly and I don't know anything about them and they say, okay, Mr. Wellness Guy, what do I do to improve my life? Again, not having any conversation, nothing. If I'm just guessing, sleep is it's the obvious first step. So good stuff. Everybody understands the importance of sleep. So let's jump into some hot topics. First one, how much does sleep deprivation actually influence our performance? I know you've done a lot of your research on sleep and performance, but when it comes to that combination, that overplay, what's the impact?
It's an incredible impact. Sleep really, I get the question all the time, what's the impact of not getting enough sleep? And honestly, it would be quicker for me to tell you what isn't impacted by not getting enough sleep, and that is literally nothing. It's so hard for you to do things when you're not getting enough sleep because you are literally working against your brain. Your brain needs sleep to be able to function, and if you're not getting enough sleep, you can't do anything. You're going to be grumpier, you're going to be less motivated, it's going to be harder for you to do absolutely everything. And if you're trying to, play sport or do research or just generally, get around your life, it's going to be much more difficult for you to be able to do that if you're not getting enough sleep.
Yeah, very well said. Very well said. Some of the research I've done is on literally mental toughness and sleep, and it was interesting to see that overplay. Okay, the difference between physical and cognitive decline with sleep deprivation, and let's talk more the temporary, the in the moment versus the 20, 30, 40 years down the road. But can you walk us through the influence of sleep or sleep deprivation on the physical decline, and then also address the cognitive? You touched on both of those, but can you take us on a deeper dive on each one of those?
Yeah, sure. So we find that for people who aren't getting enough sleep, generally their coordination will be impacted. If we're talking about kind of more immediate impacts rather than down the line, it may not necessarily be particularly noticeable after one night of not getting enough sleep. But after a couple of nights, you realize you start to drop things. It's going to be harder for you to, perform simple tasks. But the more cognitive aspects are going to be more noticeable straight away. Things like being grumpy. I always, when I talk to people about sleep, the first thing I ask them is who's ever thrown a tantrum and then realized that it's, mostly due to not getting enough sleep. And if I don't get 90% of the audience putting their hands up, it's, I know they're lying. So it's that sort of thing. It's in terms of cognitive aspects, it's just generally simple tasks being harder. We all know 2 and 2 equals 4, but when we're not getting enough sleep, it's going to take us a couple of extra seconds to get there. And one thing that I always like to highlight, because I do a lot of research with teenagers as well, driving is a really important thing to consider when we're talking about sleep and performance. We don't always consider that if we're not getting enough sleep, our safety is impacted. I think most of us know that we'll get a bit grumpy and a bit testy if we're not getting enough sleep, but our safety is really impacted. So things like driving, especially, I bring up teenagers because they're just starting to learn to drive. And they're already at an increased risk of accident from that perspective. But then if they're not getting enough sleep, our ability to respond to stimuli is impacted. So it's going to take us longer to, step on the brake. It's going to take us longer to realize and act when we see red lights and things like that. So it's not just really basic things like it's going to be harder for me to form a sentence, but it's also going to be safety critical tasks that are impacted.
Great point. Great point, especially at that age, but true for all of us, obviously. All right.
Yeah,
basic question. Do we all need 8 hours of sleep?
No, we don't. So most people are recommended to get roughly 8 hours of sleep if we're talking about adults, but we do find that this is a very individualized thing. So some people need more than that. For example, I will be the first person to put my hand up and say I need at least 9. But some people are also going to be able to function on less than 8 hours. So my recommendation is if you're spending 8 hours in bed every night, but you're not able to get 8 hours of sleep, but you're still functioning well during the day, you feel fine during the day, you are likely to be one of those people who's going to need less than 8 hours. So if you're spending 8 hours time in bed, but you're not sleeping for that time, don't stress about it because it's probably fine if you feel fine during the day.
So it's that self-reflection of, am I really feeling fine or am I just loading up on the caffeine?
Well, yes, that's another thing. If you are feeling that you need a lot of caffeine to get through the day, you're probably not feeling fine. But if you are, I have 1 cup of coffee a day in the morning. That's how I start my day. And I feel for the most part that I don't need more than that. So if you're kind of on that level, if you're having 1 or 2 coffees and you feel generally that you're well rested and you're okay during the day and you're not reaching for those supplements or, other things to keep you awake, then that's kind of the level that we're looking at here.
Okay, good. All right. Stressing it. You said don't let it bother you if. Let's talk about that a little bit because we're reading more and more about people tracking on their watch that they're not getting the sleep they thought, and now that's more stressful. And now they're like, oh my gosh, I'm not getting what should we stress out if we fall short? Let's say watches aside, but if we literally do fall short for 1 or 2 nights, or is it more important to look at maybe a 7-day or a 10-day pattern?
It's not worth stressing out because we know that stress impacts sleep. So if you have 1 night of poor sleep and you start to stress about it, that's likely to impact your subsequent night's sleep. So that's why I'm always very careful when we talk about sleep recommendations that if you're not getting 8 hours, it's not a reason to, be concerned. It is once we start to get to that more kind of long-term effect here where, if we're experiencing poor sleep for weeks at a time, that's when the concern should start to come in. But I always like to stress, I always like to, pun intended there, it's not worth stressing about. So if you're experiencing issues, go and see a GP, look up sleep hygiene online. There are things that you can implement, but the more you stress, the worse it's going to get, because stress is essentially the opposite of sleep. So if you are experiencing a lot of anxiety around sleep, that's time for you to, go and get some help about it and talk to someone about it, that sort of thing, because it's not going to help you improve your sleep quality if you're stressed out.
That's good advice. So looking at that 1 to 2 versus the 7 to 10 day patterns, do you have some guidance for us on that? Because I have read somewhere, I can't remember the reference, that it's more important to look at the broader picture. So if you don't have a good sleep tonight, it's not a big deal. It's if you're not getting a good sleep for multiple days. Do we make adjustments after 1 or 2 days, or do we keep an eye on how we're doing more broadly?
I think more broadly is the better way to go about it. If you think about it, if I have a bad night's sleep today, tomorrow I'm probably going to be a little bit grumpy, but I'll get over it after, another night of proper sleep. Once it starts getting into the weeks, I think is the point that we really need to start to consider what we can do about it. Remember also, there are going to be seasonal differences with sleep. Here it's about 40 degrees Celsius, which is roughly 102 degrees Fahrenheit. So I'm not expecting to get the best sleep tonight. My home's going to be quite warm over the next couple of days. So it's more about thinking about what the kind of triggers are for you to not have a good sleep and what you can do about that before you really need to start being concerned and going into the, into your GP and talking to them about sleep.
Gotcha. Okay, good. All right. So we're talking health and wellness, and a lot of folks trying to watch what they're eating and maybe trying to be more disciplined with certain things. What happens to our what we'll call junk food cravings when we're short on sleep? Is there any pattern, any correlation between the two?
Yes, definitely. So we do find that people who go to bed later are more likely to eat junk food. My hypothesis with that is the longer time we have between dinner and bedtime, the more time we have to consume junk food. That's generally the time of day where we kind of don't have a lot of distractions and we're really starting to crave sugar. So that's, peak time to sit in front of the television and chow down on a bag of chocolates. And also, if you're getting poor quality sleep, you're very likely to crave more junk food as well. So there is a very clear link between sleep and junk food consumption, or sleep and poor diet, because sleep helps to regulate our hormones, and a lot of hormones will regulate our appetite. So the less sleep you get, generally the hungrier you are, but also you're going to be making poorer decisions around sugar and fats, especially when we're not getting enough sleep. Our body craves high sugar, high fat foods because it thinks it's going to keep us going, when actually there's no scientific evidence to suggest that high fat foods will do that. So there's a lot around the relationship between sleep and diet.
Okay, so you talked about caffeine earlier. Let's come back to that one, because one of the things that I hear a lot, and probably a lot of the folks listening maybe are even saying and not just hearing, but I'm fine. I just have an extra cup of coffee. I drink my 4 or 5 cups a day, but I've seen the research. Coffee's good if you're over X amount. What do you say to that person that's saying, I'm fine. I'm getting through it. I don't need my sleep. The caffeine keeps me rolling. What's your response to that as a sleep researcher?
Caffeine might keep you rolling, but it's not going to keep you healthy. So if we think about this from the perspective of what sleep does for you, it helps regulate your emotions. It helps you perform at an adequate level to keep you safe. It helps you interact with your family and friends. I could go on here all day
Sure.
for all of the things that sleep will do for you, the positive aspects of it. Caffeine is going to help you not fall asleep. There are, conflicting evidences around, is caffeine actually going to help you to perform better? And I think generally the answer is no. Then there are all of the negative things like heart palpitations, jitters, all of that around caffeine as well if we're consuming a lot. So it might keep you going, but it's not going to keep you healthy, is my 2 cents there. I don't think it's an adequate replacement for sleep.
So it allows you to survive. It does not allow you to thrive.
Exactly. Yeah, that's very well said.
Okay. Okay, good. All right. Let's talk about surprises. People have heard a lot about sleep lately. What are some of the biggest surprises you've discovered in your research that people might say, huh, never heard that before?
For me, I guess because I do a lot of research around children, my thesis that I finished last year was specifically around the relationships between sleep and health in kids and teens. We ran a study that looked at the relationship between sleep and growth, and we found that kids who weren't getting enough sleep were actually growing at a slower rate
Mm.
than kids who were getting enough sleep. And I think, we all know that sleep's important for us and we know that it's something that we have to do. But when you can actually see the physical detriments of not getting enough sleep, for me, that was kind of a moment where I went, oh, this really is important.
Oh, it's huge.
Mm.
Wow. Wow. Okay, good. That's a great starting. Any others that might, because I have not heard that before. That's fascinating. Any others that kind of pop out to you?
I mean, there's so much to consider here when we're talking about sleep. One other thing is we ran a study to look at essentially simulating a school week. So we know that teenagers, as they go through puberty, experience a number of changes that make it harder for them to go to sleep at a time that allows them to wake up well rested for school in the morning.
Mm-hmm.
And I know I talk a lot about kids here, but this is also relevant for adults. If we're working a 9 to 5, a lot of people are going to be not getting enough sleep before they have to get up to go to work in the morning too. So we ran a study where kids got 5 nights of short sleep to simulate the school week, and then 2 nights of long sleep to simulate the weekend. And we found that after 2 nights of long sleep, the kids felt fine. Subjectively, they were saying that they were well rested and they were completely fine, but we were still seeing a lot of performance deficits even after those 2 nights.
Mm.
So what that tells me is that a weekend is not sufficient to make up for a work week or a school week of not getting enough sleep. But there's that extra kind of dangerous element of, if we think we're fine, we're less likely to be taking, safety precautions. If we're driving and we know that we're not, performing at the best of our ability, we might pull over and take a short nap, or, we might reach for that extra coffee, or, we might drive a little bit more slowly, or we might not drive, which would obviously be the best option. But if we think we're fine, we're not going to be taking those precautions, which could potentially put us, at a greater risk.
Yes. And if we think we're fine, we may not prioritize sleep hygiene. We may not prioritize, okay, I'll shut the TV off a little bit early because we think, you know what, I'll catch up on the weekend. I always do. I feel fine going into Monday. Are there things people can look for where they can say, oh, wow, she's right. I'm not fine?
I think it's mostly important to be aware of our performance, because that's kind of our best measure of how we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, it's easier for me in a lab environment. I can give someone a test and I can look at their response times, which obviously we can't do in real life. But
Sure.
try to think about, am I dropping things? Am I stumbling over my words? They may not be really obvious, but just try to be kind of aware of how you're traveling, and if you're making small mistakes that you wouldn't make otherwise, or if simple tasks are taking you a little bit longer, that might be your kind of, hint that perhaps you're not performing at 100%.
Good. So that self-reflection is key in that case.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So you touched on sleep hygiene earlier. You said, let's Google sleep hygiene. Can you walk us through a few? So if we go beyond the classic guidance of late caffeine intake, having your room prepped, nice and dark, having a little bit of a wind down time, limiting that blue light, beyond kind of those, 3 or 4 key ones, are there other suggestions you'd have for the person that's might be having trouble falling asleep?
Those ones, they are basic, but they are really important to consider.
Mm.
And things, especially around technology, if I had $1 for every time I've told someone put the phone down before bed, I would be very, very rich. They are relatively simple, but those are the steps that you need to be taking to give yourself the best chance of having good quality sleep and sufficient sleep as well. Putting your phone down an hour before bed, not using any kind of technology for that hour, and giving yourself that wind down time, and also going to bed at the same time if possible, every night, is really important, because it actually teaches your body when to sleep, which is the best way of ensuring a good night's sleep. If you're going to bed at irregular times and, on Wednesday you're going to bed at midnight and on Thursday you're going to bed at 9, it's going to be really difficult for your body to work out what's going on, essentially. So it's
Right.
going to be harder for you to sleep. The other thing that I always like to stress when we're talking about getting enough sleep is if you're sleeping in on Sunday morning, you might feel great on Sunday, but it's very likely to make it more difficult for you to go to bed on Sunday night at a normal time.
Hmm.
So when you wake up on Monday morning, that sleep is going to be restricted and you're going to be starting your work week on a negative note because you're not going to be well rested enough to deal with your Monday. So having regular bedtimes is really important.
Okay, good. Well, that's a big one that I didn't have on that initial list. With the blue light, quick question on that. So we have people A, watching television, and B, reading on their iPads or other tablets. Is that television providing blue light, or is that a different type than your phone provides? And what do you think of the reading on the tablet at night? Is that destroying what we're trying to do here?
I think the best thing to do would be to read a book if at all possible. Other options are reading things like Kindles that don't have the backlight. The difference mostly, I think, between the television and the iPad is the distance between the light and your eyes. So if you're holding the iPad quite close to your face, you're getting kind of instant blue light right at the eye level. Whereas if your television is on the other side of the room, there's much longer for it to travel between your eyes. We also look a lot at how interactive the technology is. So the more you have to interact with the technology, the more stimulated you're going to be once you're going to bed. So for example, if you're playing games, on an iPad or on the television, for example, before you're going to bed, you're much more likely to be too stimulated to get to sleep when you do turn it off. Something else to consider is the end point. So if you're watching television, your end point might be when the show or the movie finishes. Whereas if you're playing video games, there's not necessarily an end point to that. So when do you turn off is also something to consider.
That's good. That's good. Okay, so that's problem A, the person that's having trouble falling asleep. Let's go to classic problem B, the person that falls asleep, but then they wake up for whatever reason, they hear a noise, they've got to go to the bathroom, whatever, and now they have trouble falling back to sleep. Any tips for that second group of folks?
Number one tip, if you get up to go to the bathroom, don't turn the lights on.
Okay.
So turning the light on is going to be really alerting, and that's going to make it much more difficult for you to fall back to sleep when you do go to bed. If you're having trouble falling asleep after you've woken up, a good tip is actually to go and do something else that's not very alerting, that's going to be boring. And then once you start to feel tired, to go back to bed. If we spend a lot of time in bed awake, our bodies will start to associate being in bed with being awake, which is not very conducive to sleep. And we also find that people who spend a lot of time in bed awake feel stress, which, as I mentioned earlier, is obviously not. So going to do something else, reading a book in dim light or making yourself a herbal cup of tea, making sure that there's no caffeine in it, might be a good way to kind of overcome that.
Good. All right. You've done some of your research on performance recovery from insufficient sleep. Can you tell us more about your findings and the implications of that research?
Yeah, so basically the biggest takeaway from that is a weekend is not enough to make up for 5 nights of not getting enough sleep. And we also find that if you're consistently going to bed later, your internal clocks will delay, which means that when you're waking up in the morning, your body's very likely to still think that it's nighttime. Your internal clocks will be telling you that you should still be asleep, which means that it's really difficult for you to perform in the morning. So a lot of stuff around, maintaining an adequate bedtime, making sure you're not getting a lot of exposure to bright light at night to help you kind of stay aligned with the external day-night cycle is really important there.
Okay, good. And so starting point, if someone came to you tomorrow and said, Dr. Agostini, I'm just not sleeping, anything else you would throw out to them beyond some of those aspects that you mentioned for the person that isn't recovered and needs to get the ball rolling again? Are there some other tips that you might throw out there for them?
Making sure they have adequate sleep hygiene is step number one. And I always Yes, when we're talking about sleep hygiene, it's not a quick fix. If you do it for one night or 2 nights, it's not going to.
Great reminder.
Because your body actually needs time to learn and time to adjust to that. If you've done that for, 3 weeks to a month and you're not experiencing any differences, then it's time to go and see your GP about, some sort of screening for sleep disorders or insomnia or something along those lines.
So would that be your basic recommendation is 3 to 4 weeks? Give it time, give it that, 21 to 28 days, and then take the step. Don't give up after 2 days, but also don't give up after 10 days.
Yeah, I always have to stress that it is, your body does need time to recover. Know 100% that you are feeling horrible and you can't function and you're at risk to yourself and others if you're doing things like driving, then it might be time to do it before the 21 days. So it's a combination of severity as well as those other factors.
Okay, good. Just a couple more. The one we love to ask everybody, how are you applying your research in your own life on a personal level? Is there some personal health and wellness pursuit you're going after now, and you're taking some of the things you're learning in your research and saying, okay, doc, how am I going to use this?
That's a great question to ask. I'm really interested in weightlifting.
Okay.
And so I am particularly active at the gym, and I know, and I always tell people that your sleep will directly impact your physical activity as well. So we touched on diet earlier, but we do find, the studies find that those who don't get enough sleep are less likely to do exercise, or they're less likely to do as much exercise, and they're more likely to get injured. So if I'm throwing around a lot of weight, it's really important for me to be getting enough sleep. So I do try as much as possible to ensure that I'm getting good sleep hygiene. Sleep's also really important for recovery as well. So if I'm, throwing around a lot of weight, I'm obviously putting my muscles under a lot of stress and I'm breaking those muscles and those fibers. So for them to get better, for them to recover and for them to grow, I need to get a lot of sleep too. So always trying to ensure that I've got good sleep hygiene. My bedroom is perfect for sleep. Maybe not tonight, as I mentioned, because it's going to be quite warm, but it's dark. I've got adequate curtains. My pillows are replaced frequently. I don't do any work in my bedroom, refuse to do that because I don't want to be associating my bedroom with being awake. So it's all about, trying as much as possible to have good sleep hygiene and making sure that I'm being reasonable with my expectations of sleep as well. So I know tonight it's probably not going to be great. I'm not going to stress about it. It's just going to be one of those things that we deal with, and tomorrow night might be better.
What a great answer. We have so many people listening that are saying, well, I'm a runner. Well, I'm a triathlete. Well, I'm a weightlifter. Great answer. Just a reminder that we're not just talking about this for getting through your day or having that little bit better relationship or more effective at work. We're also talking about recovery from the athletics, preparation for the athletics, et cetera, et cetera. So very good one. Last one, our listeners, most of them are looking to help other people improve their health and wellness. Anything I haven't teed up with the right question that you'd like to throw out to folks that are in that type of a role?
I think the best thing to do, and something that I always try to do when I talk to people in that kind of capacity, is a lot of people overlook sleep because they don't understand how important it is. And so when I talk to people about things that they can do to improve sleep, I'm always like, great, happy to do that. But first, let me tell you why you should improve sleep. Because sleep's almost like eating your vegetables, right?
Sure.
A lot of people say, yes, I can't wait to smash some Brussels sprouts. Sleep is something that we feel like we have to do, but it's kind of, almost a waste because it means we can't hang out with our friends, or I can't go out on the weekend or something like that. So you need to really encourage people and explain to them why it's so important, and then they're more likely to be on board.
Love it. What a great way to wrap up. Dr. Agostini, thank you so much for joining us. Keep up the great work. What's the best way for folks to keep track of you? Are you on Twitter? Do you have a website? If they want to follow your research and some of the things you're discovering.
Yeah, I'm on Twitter. I'm Alex Agostini 3 on Twitter, and I post all the time.
Perfect. Well, we will be following you there, and thank you again for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
Ready to grab a few extra winks tonight? I tell you, sleep can be a tough topic. We're all learning how valuable it is, and yet many of us, myself included, struggle with it at times. I hope you're able to garner a few nuggets from Dr. Agostini in this episode. 2020 is just a few weeks away. In an upcoming episode, I'll be talking about creating a clear and meaningful vision for your own life as you head into the new year, the new decade. If part of that vision is to become a certified wellness coach, our next 2 fast-track certifications are coming up relatively soon. Your first opportunity will be February 8th and 9th, and your second will be April 4th and 5th. Either one of these events will set you up to pursue the National Board certification before their requirements increase later next year. However, both probably will fill up early, so don't wait if it's something you've been considering. And if it's helpful, there is a 6-month no-interest payment option through PayPal available that allows you to spread out that investment. All the details at catalystcoachinginstitute.com, or please email us anytime, results@catalystcoachinginstitute.com. Now, it's time to shut off the podcast and put it into action as we work toward better. One of the things I've learned in my own research is that better often begins in the bedroom. And I'm talking about placing an emphasis on enhancing both the quality and the quantity of our sleep. Dr. Agostini provided us with a starting point. Now it's up to us to put that into practice consistently. Thanks again for joining us. This is Dr. Bradford Cooper signing off. Make it a great rest of your day and night, and I'll speak with you soon on the next episode of the Catalyst Health and Wellness Coaching Podcast.